If you search what's the most common or rarest Enneagram type, you'll find a lot of conflicting opinions. Today, we're going to look at one of the more sensational claims, this one by Richard Rohr.
I told you earlier, the 6 is by far the biggest type. Many would say it's actually 50% of the human race.
Now, Rohr's claim doesn't align with my experience, and it also contradicts the findings of many other sources. For example, this popular Enneagram test found that 6s only comprise 16%, not 50 to 60% of the population, as Rohr suggested. That's a really wide discrepancy. So I think it's worth asking, what's really going on here? Because whether or not we can come to a conclusive answer, I think that wrestling with this discrepancy is going to bring us to some really useful, deep understandings about the Enneagram. So let's consider a couple of possibilities. 1, Rohr is just wrong. Maybe he's not a good Enneagram teacher. Maybe he's just super biased and mistyping a bunch of people. His claim is anecdotal and therefore useless. Let's just trust the test. Now, I like Richard Rohr. I respect him. He's written a great book on the Enneagram. So I don't think he's just widely mistyping a bunch of people. While his claim is anecdotal, maybe based on his and a few of his colleagues' experiences, I think it's worth giving him the benefit of the doubt and assuming that maybe 50% or more of the people that he comes across in his teaching work are type 6s. So let's consider possibility 2. Rohr's right, everyone else is wrong. Maybe we should just trust the Enneagram expert and not the online test. I mean, most Enneagram teachers and experts don't seem to like or recommend tests anyway. And while online Enneagram tests may seem more valid because they're tests and tests sound more objective, Enneagram tests don't exactly meet rigorous scientific standards, so I wouldn't assume that they're more valid. And admittedly, while I don't like Enneagram tests as a matter of practicality, I think it's better to figure out your Enneagram type through inquiry because then you'll actually understand something about yourself and how to use the Enneagram as a tool for growth. I'll admit that a decently designed test, more often than not, can get you to your likely type. In other words, my issue with tests lies more so in their usefulness rather than in their accuracy. So like Rohr's finding, while tests aren't perfect, I think it's reasonable to assume that their findings are ballpark accurate enough to not just totally dismiss them. Which puts us in a bit of a dilemma because now we need to figure out how two possibly true but highly conflicting claims can somehow coexist. How do we resolve the test findings that only 16% of takers are type 6s, with Rohr's claim that 6s make up 50 to 60% of the population? I want to suggest that there's a third possibility that we need to consider: sample bias. Now, I know we're just talking about anecdotal claims and online Enneagram tests here, but if we were doing real rigorous research and trying to answer a question like, what's the most common Enneagram type? There'd be a lot of confounding factors that we'd have to account for to actually get to a valid answer to that question. And one of those factors is sample bias or selection bias. You see, if you want to make claims about a general population, you have to make sure that the sample that you're studying is random, that it actually reflects the general population, and that it's not just a niche specific group of people. For example, if you want to learn about general obesity rates in America, you can't just study the body fat percentages of the college track team. If you want to know who might be the next US president, you can't just pull a sample of people in Waco, Texas or San Francisco and assume that that's how the general population is going to vote. People are attracted to certain geographic places, groups, and belief systems based on their personalities. And I think that's what explains Rohr's finding. And while online Enneagram tests aren't immune to their own types of sample bias, maybe certain personality types are more likely to be interested in taking personality tests and studying the Enneagram, they still cast a little bit wider or general of a net. Personality and knowing yourself is something that most everyone is kind of interested in. In comparison, though, Richard Rohr is most well known in the Enneagram community for his book, The Enneagram: A Christian Perspective. But more so than being an Enneagram teacher, Richard Rohr is really a Christian teacher who uses the Enneagram as an adjunct or tool. Rohr's written over 20 books on faith, not explicitly about the Enneagram. The point of all of this is to say that the people who Rohr comes across, or the people that are attracted to his seminars or groups, are likely not representative of a random sample of the general population, or even a sample of people broadly interested in personality. They're people who share a certain set of faith-based beliefs and values. So I want to suggest that Rohr's claim says less about the most common Enneagram type and more about how certain Enneagram types may be drawn to different religions or spiritual paths based on their personality tendencies. Maybe there's something about Christian teachings and communities that tends to disproportionately attract sixes. That's my hypothesis, at least. Many things central to the six personality are present in or get met through Christianity. The gravitation towards community and social engagement, the emphasis on family values and tradition, the need for support and guidance, and on a deeper metaphysical level, teachings that address some of our deepest anxieties and fears about death that maybe everyone has, but sixes seem to struggle with most deeply. Now, interestingly enough, not too long ago, I did a podcast with an Enneagram 6 friend of mine, and while he was sharing this story about reconnecting with his Christian faith and joining a worship band at a new church, he shared this observation about the group's makeup.
But what I was finding too is that in talking to a lot of these folks, and I think part of the reason I just felt connected in a way, even though we maybe I didn't see anything in common, or very different people, like, younger, older, like it was just like, but it was a weird connection, is that most of them were sixes. And Bingo! It was just like, it was beyond interesting. And it was like sixes, but it was like a lot of two heart types. So, I would see that too, but it was like across the board, it was like sixes, and you could see it. And it was very, most of them, like I want to say like 3/4, maybe more. And it was just like that.
I'm
it
salivating for a response.
Yes,
right now.
yes. So go ahead.
Okay. So there's another anecdote that seems to agree with Rohr, but does that finding generalize to the broader population? I don't think so. I think it simply says something about our personalities, or even our essences, and how they shape our affinity towards certain beliefs and communities. Chris wasn't talking about joining some gym club and noticing that most of the people there were sixes. He wasn't talking about going on a yoga retreat and noticing that most of the people there were sixes. He was talking about joining a Christian community and noticing that most of the people there were sixes. Now, interestingly, if you go back through the podcast, all the reasons that I previously gave to support the idea that sixes are more prevalent in Christian communities came up naturally in our conversation earlier.
I got the best dad you could ever ask for. He put God, above everything else, just from, his Christian. Being a part of this worship band and meeting more people, I'm like realizing how many people I'm meeting that are just like, these people feel like family right away. Every single one of us, we all like support each other. I did from time to time question my faith, and like, what if you, like, I remember being a kid and panicking, like that fear of death. It's like, what if we just become nothing? Like that thought of becoming nothing, and what if there's nothing? Like, that's panicking.
All right, well, that about wraps it up. And if you were looking for a definitive answer about the most common or rarest Enneagram type, I'm sorry, but you're probably not going to get it from this video, and you're probably not going to get it anywhere, because all of the theories and claims and anecdotes that try to answer that question all have their own problems, and maybe I'll make another video addressing some of those separate claims. But hopefully you actually got something, I think, a lot more useful out of it, rather than an answer to the most common or rarest type, which is this framework that the Enneagram provides us to inquire deeply within ourselves, and in this case, to consider how our personalities and our tendencies might shape our affinities towards certain groups or belief systems. Thanks for watching, and I would love to hear more in the comments if you have any observations or thoughts in regards to the most common type from your own experiences, and particularly if you're a member of any groups or communities, or maybe even careers or workplaces, or any place where a certain group of people gathers. And if you've noticed that there seems to be a certain type or several types that are more common in that environment. Thanks for watching. See you next time.